Well, we're in the middle of a 7-week series about how to live in the joyful reality that the great I am is greater than I am. And the emphasis here is on studying what God has to say about actually living in that reality. Because it is very easy to say, the great I am is greater than I am. But so many of us are living in a low-grade anxiety all the time. So many of us have so much worry and so little joy. It's obvious that we're not living in diagram 3 with Jesus on the throne. We're living back in something much less exciting and joyful. We're living in diagram 2. And some of you are saying, huh? Diagram 2? Diagram 3? What did I miss? Okay, I'll keep it brief, but for the sake of those who have seen these graphics before, I will try to move along very quickly. See, we all have a throne inside, and whoever sits on the throne of my life, it sets the agenda and the priorities for my life. Diagram 1 depicts a person who does not believe in Jesus. And notice that Jesus is symbolized by the cross and is outside the circle of this unbeliever's life. And notice who is on the throne. It's S for self. And notice that when Jesus is outside my life and I am on the throne, there is sadness inside in my inner life, the brokenness of being separated from God with chaos and worries and fears all around. But then there's diagram 3 that depicts what happens when I trust in Jesus and Jesus is on the throne of my life. I'm filled with wholehearted joy. I'm rescued from the tyranny of worries and fears. I'm rescued from myself and my selfishness. But unfortunately, many of us who call ourselves Christ followers are not living this way. We're living this way. We're living in second diagram mess here where you notice that Jesus is inside the circle because I'm a believer, but life is so difficult because the rightful king is not on the throne. Self is on the throne. Jesus is not on the throne, which leads to a life that is void of that wholehearted joy and the peace that comes with diagram 3, which is actually living in the truth that I am is greater than I am. It's not just saying it, it's living it. But how do I do this? How do I go from diagram 2 to diagram 3? How do I live with Jesus on the throne of my life? Where it always begins, where Jesus says it always begins, and it begins with my becoming a true follower of Jesus. Moving from diagram 2 to diagram 3 begins with becoming a true follower of Jesus. And the great I am is on the throne when I am his follower, which is the other half of what we talked about last time, which is being a disciple. Last time we reflected on how Jesus calls me to be his disciple, which means being a student of Jesus who learns how to think like Jesus. But developing the mind of Jesus is only half the story. Jesus also always calls me to be his follower, which means that I am committed to go where Jesus goes and do what Jesus does. Jesus always begins by calling you to follow him. You know how in the Gospels, Jesus would come up to 2 sets of brothers and say, Peter and Andrew, James and John, follow me. And these professional fishermen dropped their nets and followed Jesus. Jesus did the same thing with a tax collector and said, Matthew, follow me. And Matthew literally left money on the table, dropped everything, and followed Jesus. Hey, I'm wondering how many of you have seen this history-making, crowdsourced TV series called The Chosen. It's about Jesus and his disciples. How many of you have seen at least one episode of The Chosen? I don't know about you, but I think it is great. The Chosen refers to those first followers of Jesus, and each episode begins with an animated opening credit scene that I think is really inspiring. The opening credit scene begins with a school of fish, and the fish are all gray, all identical, all going in the same direction. And then suddenly, in the grayness, one brightly colored fish starts swimming in the opposite direction. One fish against the flow, but then one by one, that fish turns other fish from gray to the joyful color, and they start going against the gray current together, following the lead fish. And as these fish are changing color and changing direction, we realize we're seeing what happened 2,000 years ago when Jesus called his first followers who went against the world current and changed the world. But this is still happening today. Today, masses of gray fish are all going in the same direction of worry and fear and insecurity and selfishness, but Jesus is still going in the opposite direction. And Jesus is still locking eyes with people one by one and saying, "Follow me." People like you. Jesus is not talking to the crowd, not to the masses. He's talking to you, asking, will you choose to be one of my chosen? The question is, will you turn around? Will you follow Jesus? And you'll notice that I'm emphasizing this idea of turning around. That's because it's the whole point behind the biblical idea of following Jesus. Turning around is that point where the gray, boring fish turns brightly technicolor like Jesus. Being a Christ follower means turning around and going where Jesus is going despite the opposing currents. I mean, how do I know if I'm really following Jesus? I'm not just talking about it. How do I know I'm really following Jesus? How do I know that I've moved from diagram 2 to diagram 3? Here's how. I know that I am a follower of Jesus if my life is a struggle. I know I'm a follower of Jesus if I am swimming against the internal gray mass. I'm swimming against the gray current that's going in the opposite direction that Jesus is going. So how about you? Are you a follower of Jesus? Well, here's the test about this thing. If you are not feeling like you're fighting against the overwhelming current, the gray current of your own ugly attitudes of impatience and anger and bitterness and frustration, if you are not feeling like you're swimming against a tide of selfishness and your selfish desire to use all your time and all your energy just for your self-protection and your self-comfort, if you don't find yourself swimming against the tide, the current of currency, the appetite for more and more material things, such as you end up being possessed by your possessions unless you're fighting against that current. And if you're not fighting against this, if you're not doing what Jesus calls carrying the cross, if you're not fighting against this current, you are crowd following. You're not Christ following. What I'm saying is that it is so easy for me to just deceive myself into thinking that I am really following Jesus when the truth is I'm just going with the flow of society in the opposite direction of where Jesus is going. It's so easy to deceive yourself into thinking you're following Jesus when the truth is you have no intention of turning around and following Jesus upstream. A well-known pastor named Greg Groeschel tells a story about a flight that he was on. It had a stopover where he had to, in the middle of the flight, had to change planes. The first leg of the flight, he was sitting next to Travis. And Travis was very eager to talk. He was very excited about making money. He was very excited about his real estate business and how much more money he thought he could get if he just worked a little bit harder. And then Travis eventually was asking, Craig, what do you do? He says, I'm a pastor. Travis says, hey, no disrespect, but I don't believe in God. And I think Christians are just making up a myth to satisfy their need for security. Travis said, I don't need a make-believe God for security. I make my own peace. I make my own security. That was the first flight. He gets off the plane, gets onto the next leg of the flight, and he's sitting next to Michelle. And Michelle really wants to talk. She's nervous about flying, and so talking seems to help her. But she says, as much as I'm afraid of flying, it's nothing compared to the fear my boyfriend has about marriage. That's why we've been living together for all these years. And then she goes on and talks, and then eventually says, so Craig, what do you do? And he says, I'm a pastor. And she said, what a coincidence. I'm a Christ follower too. And she says, and then she goes on to give her story about how when she was in high school, she gave her life to Jesus. And now how she really doesn't go to church, but she tries to share her faith where she can. And she prays every night. She prays that her boyfriend would become a believer in Jesus. And that's when she begins to cry. She begins to cry and say, I know that if he would just become a believer in Jesus like me, he would want to marry me. And then she would say, I know Jesus does not approve of this relationship I have with this guy. I know that Jesus wants me to attend church and to grow in my faith, but I'm just so busy and I have so many problems in my life. And well, my boyfriend would not approve of the church thing. And then she closes the whole thing by saying, don't get the wrong idea. Even though I don't live like a Christ follower, I believe in Jesus. And Craig said that there's that moment when he realized that there's more than one kind of atheist. He said that there's Travis, the atheist, who lives as if God does not exist. And then there's Michelle, a believer who lives like God does not exist. And so Michelle became the basis for Craig's book called The Christian Atheist. And I'm very sad to say, that's what some of us are. Some of us are Christian atheists because we have areas in our lives. We call ourselves Christ followers. We have areas in our lives, though, where we have no intention of following Jesus. There are certain areas in our lives where we harbor attitudes or we harbor actions in our lives we know are going against the direction Jesus is going. But instead of turning around, we try to just kind of reconcile it in our minds by making in that area, well, God just doesn't exist. Maybe like Michelle, you say, I'm a Christ follower, but when it comes to my romantic relationships, it's like God doesn't exist. Or I'm a believer, but when it comes to obsessing with worry over every detail in my kids' lives, it has to be like God doesn't exist for me. Or I'm a believer, but when it comes to forgiving some people, it has to be like God doesn't exist in that area. Or I'm a Christ follower, but when it comes to actually making time for regular worship, nurturing spiritual friendships, actually spending some time alone in Scripture and in prayer develop my relationship with God, in those areas, I'm just a Christian atheist. Listen, we all fail. I fail. I sin. That's the great part about following Jesus, is it's grace, that we're chosen, not forsaken, that we can always find grace in Jesus. That's why being a follower of Jesus means that it's a constant story of turning around, and fighting against the current to follow Jesus. But what I can't do is call myself a follower of Jesus when I'm actually drifting away from Jesus downstream because I have no intention of turning around while my life just falls apart. Which brings us back to this question of going from diagram to diagram 3 and the idea of getting off the throne of my life and following Jesus, the great I am, who holds everything together. In Colossians, we're going back to Colossians chapter 1 in each one of these messages. And in Colossians chapter 1, Paul says this in verse 9. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of His will, through all the wisdom and understanding that His Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please Him in every way. So right there, this expresses how I go from diagram 2 to diagram 3. Getting myself off the throne is this process of filling myself with the knowledge of God's will for me, yielding to His Holy Spirit, and then actually living a life worthy, catch that word, worthy of the Lord. That word worthy is a very unusual word. Bible scholars believe this word worthy was well known to Paul and the early church as a signature word of Jesus, meaning that Jesus used this word worthy in a way that was so shocking that people could never forget it after He said it. So let's go to Matthew chapter 10, where Jesus uses it. Jesus says, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up his or her cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Jesus is the great I am. He is so worthy. He is worthy of my highest love, reserved only for Him, a love higher than for any other person. He is so worthy that He is worth any personal sacrifice I must incur in order to follow Him. Jesus is worthy. And that's what Jesus means when He says that anyone who does not take up his or her cross is not worthy of me. For Jesus, the cross represented His intentional choice to endure whatever personal sacrifice necessary in order to follow the Father's will for Him. So in the same way, taking up the cross means choosing Jesus' will for me despite the personal cost. Jesus is so worthy of sacrifice that if I am not willing to sacrifice little cravings and comforts and conveniences in my life in order to follow Him, I am not worthy of the name follower of Jesus. Some of us need to hear Jesus say with sorrow in His heart that your lifestyle does not make you worthy to call yourself my follower. Being Jesus' follower means taking up the cross, taking up whatever pain, whatever effort of swimming against the current is necessary in order to follow Jesus. For Michelle, that means taking up the cross means loving Jesus more than this non-marrying, non-believing boyfriend, and enduring whatever temporary pain she has to endure in order to follow Jesus and not Him. For me, taking up the cross may mean going to that person who speaks hurtfully toward me and then enduring the temporary pain of restraining my desire to verbally retaliate and instead show kindness. Following Jesus means going where He is going. Where is Jesus going? Jesus is going to joy. Jesus is going to perfect joy, perfect peace, an abundant life. Jesus is going into the eternity of perfect heaven where there is no crying and no pain. But just like for Jesus, my pathway to the Father's perfect will for me, his perfect peace, his perfect joy, his perfect heaven, goes through the cross. In order for me to go from where I am now to the Father's perfect will for me, I must carry the cross. I must go through the cross of temporary pains and temporary inconveniences. I must take up the cross, swim against the current, and follow Jesus. Going from diagram 2 to diagram 3 is more than just saying, I'm a Christ follower. Following Jesus is the daily decision to turn around and swim against the current, the gray current that is within me, within you. There's a gray current inside you, inside me, that causes us to just want to accept compromise, accept conformity, and accept that we're just going to be angry and selfish and people-pleasing just like everybody else who swims around us. I don't go against the flow because it's painful to swim against the tide. But that's what carrying the cross is all about. And it's when I turn around, when I carry the cross, that's when I go from drab and lifeless to technicolor and following Jesus. That's what it means to really live in the joy of Jesus, the great I am. And swimming against the current is where I experience this joy of leaving the masses behind and becoming one of the chosen. And the question is, will you be one of the chosen? Will you choose to be one of Jesus' chosen? Right now, Jesus is calling you through the symbols of the bread and cup, the symbols of the cross. You can find that packet right now for communion. If you're watching at home, you might want to get your elements gathered there at home. And if you're a follower of Jesus, Jesus invites you to take these symbols as a reminder that he died for you. It's a reminder of his call to you to turn around and follow him. Maybe for the first time, but for most of us, this is a recall. We have to always hear his call. Turn around, follow me. Turn around, follow me. Carry your cross, swim against the tide. The bread and the cup symbolize the sacrifice Jesus made for you on the cross. And the question hanging in the air is, are you ready? Are you ready to endure whatever personal sacrifice you have to involved in turning around and going against the current to follow Jesus and his call to go higher, to go deeper in following him, which is going higher and deeper in the joyful life of being one of his chosen.
Thank you for watching Black Rock Church's Sunday service. We're so glad you found us, and we hope this message made you feel more connected to God. In talking about connection, we find that it's super important for people to be connected to others and to community in order to grow in their faith. So if you're in the area, we invite you to join us to worship in a service. You can find out about our times and locations right here on this webpage. We'd also love to help you connect in a group and find people who can walk alongside you as you continue deepening your understanding and faith. And after you get to know us, you might even like to use your gifts to serve on a team. We believe God gave each of us unique gifts that we can use to serve those around us. One body with many different parts. If you're not able to be here in person, don't worry. We have a great online community and many ways for you to join in virtually and talk to us throughout the week. You can also stay in touch on our website, YouTube channel, Facebook, and Instagram. By visiting our website, you can also easily give your offering one time as an online gift or a reoccurring gift. Just click Give at the top. The Bible tells us that tithing is an important part of our relationship with Jesus, and we want to continue to trust God with our lives and our finances. Well, we are so glad you made the choice to get to know us and view one of our services. We hope that you join us next week. Thanks so much for watching.